Andrea Phillippe Regard, born 16th March 1965, Sao Paulo, died 13th May 1991, Ward 6, Hove General Hospital. Andrea Phillippe Regard was a young, talented Brazilian florist, always a lover of convenience in any shape or form. When my cafe opened to replace the tool shop opposite, he was overjoyed. Andrea had little need for power tools, unless attached to someone suitably swarthy, but he loved a good coffee. I'd join him for his tales of our city, which usually began in the bulldog and ended with his legs in the air somewhere in the area. He had a big appetite for large men, the rougher the better, straight tradesmen a speciality. They couldn't get enough of his boyish good looks, big brown eyes and one-liners, and nor could I. One day he came in looking particularly worse for wear, but still smiling as always. My "What happened to you?" was met with a wry smile as he recounted a gymnastics session with a plumber from Bath, who'd been working away from home and wife. Jack was lean, muscular, and 6'2". Bingo. After last orders, Jack had lured Andrea back to a nearby derelict building where he was staying and working. They'd fucked like the world was ending, but after a grunting climax, Jack's face flooded with guilt, so Andrea made his excuses and left. Hungry drunk when he arrived home, Andrea decided on a Fray Bentos steak pie, which he plunged into a pan of water and set to boil. An hour or so later, just as dawn was breaking, he was jolted awake by the exploding pie, which had turned the kitchen into an insane scatological Jackson Pollock with added shrapnel. But he didn't care. It's a new look, darling. They'll all want it. Glitterball. Andrea loved a party, and his 25th birthday was a great excuse to throw one. At the time, the cafe was on a roll and the queer place to hang, so it seemed a natural choice for a venue. Plans were made and invitations sent out in embossed bespoke envelopes. On the day, we closed early and laboured to transform the space into a palace befitting a queen. The food had to match the flamboyance, so canapes mimicking the blooms in Andrea's florist were made. Arum lilies of curled calamari with stamen of sweet pepper, roses of salami and chorizo, and devilled egg daisies amongst others. Local shops were stripped of their champagne and spirit supplies, glasses polished and ice crushed. This was to be the party of the year, and everyone invited came. Shoulder pads, evening gowns, and the loudest shirts in Christendom jockeyed to congratulate and adore Andrea. There was a wonderful infectious exuberance in the room, thanks to North Lane traders and the gay scene out for a good time. Before long, hips were shaking to the finest indie, funk and crowd pleasers as Andrea flitted resplendent in a bespoke Catherine Hamnet suit of black bejewelled fabric that glittered like a night sky. Hindsight explains the weight loss since his measurements were taken. The suit was meant to be roomy and flowing, but I noticed that it hung from him. At the time, he would have brushed this off with some excuse about a new diet, but then he was always feeling fat and on some diet or another. Of course, looking back now, it's clear that he was already ill, but perhaps unaware. Knowing might have helped him change aspects of his lifestyle, but there was no medication then. Knowledge of your status was not the power to take control it is today. It simply signposted a death sentence, and there was nothing positive about it. He was buried in that suit, no doubt to make a good impression when flirting with St. Peter. Lovely wings, darling. There is a light that never goes out. Andrea ate much of his food at the cafe, and usually I'd rustle up something he fancied to order from the supplies at hand. His favourite dish was a steaming plate of pasta with a creamy mushroom and bacon sauce, covered with an inch of Parmesan cheese. But a half portion, because he was on a diet, naturally. I first remember concerns circling like black crows, when Andrea started to lose his ravenous appetite, and more of the little weight he carried on his slight frame. The boyish good looks and olive skin seemed to be fading like fabric left out in the sun. When we spoke about it, he brushed my concerns aside, and always seemed to have a perfectly reasonable explanation. I remember him looking me square in the eye and saying there was absolutely nothing to worry about. But a dark anxiety and paranoia raged amongst gay men in those days, and even a bad cold would have people jumping to conclusions. I was happy to believe what he told me for my own reasons of denial. Some time passed, and I began to notice a swelling on the left side of Andrea's neck. This time, it was an infection that was being treated, he said. Nothing to worry about. But my fears were back. At the time, I was working as a volunteer for the Sussex AIDS Centre and Helpline, and could not help but fear the worst. When the swelling grew to the size of an orange, cocking his head to the right, I had to share my fears. But any mention of the virus was smothered, the idea dismissed, and the subject quickly changed. In hindsight, I wish I had done more, but realistically it was already too late. Perhaps I saw or feared something in his face that I had already seen before. Very late one night my telephone rang, and it was Andrea. He was clearly deeply upset, and requested that I come over to see him. I dressed quickly and crossed the empty street as a fox slunk into the shadows. Andrea opened the door in tears, and I followed him up the stairs to a kitchen still stained by the Fray Ventos pollock. We sat at a table holding hands, and he confirmed my worst fears. All I remember are 3 words delivered in a terrified yelp: "I have AIDS." I moved to cradle his dwindling form in my arms and whispered, "You'll be okay," as our tears soaked my shirt. Beaches. Andrea never came back to the cafe or worked again. He was admitted to Ward 6 at the Hove General Hospital, a place few managed to leave in the early 1990s. The ward was isolated from the rest of the hospital at the very top of the building, hidden away from a public fearful of the gay plague, but also to protect those staying there. Andrea was popular, so there was always someone to visit, and I spent Sundays with him when the cafe was closed. Whenever we talked about his death, I would try to change the subject, because I didn't want to believe it. Andrea, though, was reconciled to his fate thanks to a Catholic faith which kept him fearless and accepting, but also comforted him like a warm blanket on a cold night. It was his time to go, and there was nothing that could be done. We would spend time watching movies together, gossiping, and planning visits to Sao Paulo to see the boys, bars, and beaches when he got better. Andrea would humour the plans, adding detail and anecdotes from his youth. "One day we'll stroll Rua Oscar Freire, looking for the boys," I'd say, but he knew this would never happen. "One day we'll stroll Rua Oscar Freire, looking at the boys," I'd say, but he knew this would never happen. Over the course of 2 months, Andrea disappeared as the virus acid stripped his body. Each visit would see part of him shaved away, and his suffering increased. On good days, when light would break through the clouds of his pain, he would tie up loose ends and sell his belongings so that every available penny could be sent home to his family. "How much for this, do you think?" "It's Paul Smith, darling. He sounds so boring, but he makes lovely clothes." His resolve was iron, and my love and admiration for him grew stronger with each day. When awake, he was tenacious, but always smiling or trying to make me smile. "What do you think of my new diet?" "I wanted to lose weight, darling, but this is ridiculous." I continued to visit Andrea, wrapped in a shroud of denial. No one in my life had died, and I couldn't process the situation or imagine him gone, so I avoided thinking about it. It felt impossible and ridiculous that he would not get better. He was only 26, for Christ's sake. One day, Andrea requested the movie Beaches, which I hadn't seen. All I knew was that it starred Bette Midler, so I expected something lightweight and funny. As the story of terminal illness and friendship flowed from the screen, I began to sob uncontrollably. Andrea held my hand with a rosary squeezed in between and consoled me. "I will die soon, because I'm almost ready. Do you believe in angels?" I replied that I didn't. "Well, you must," he said, "because soon I'll be watching over you." Andrea slipped into a coma and died on the 13th of May 1991. He was just 26 years old. I think of Andrea often, and it's natural for me to look up to the sky to say hello. He is the kestrel hovering by the roadside, the jet trail hexagram, the crescent moon.